Thank you all for joining us at Venable's Post-Election Insights series. Today, I'm Heather West, and I'm joined by a number of my colleagues to discuss the potential impacts of the transition and the 2024 election on AI policy. We're going to discuss regulatory and legislative developments and potential impacts on AI governance. And excited to have you here today. We will be sharing a CLE code partway through the session. I think Justin's going to share details on that in the middle and the end. And please feel free to give us questions anytime. We will address them just in time if we see them at an appropriate time, or we'll collect them for the end. So with that, I will go ahead and get going. So the election and the transition have a lot of implications for artificial intelligence and AI policy. Today, we want to spend some time going through that. But these policy shifts under a second Trump administration are potentially very impactful, but also maybe not as wide-ranging as some may expect. So we will go through that. I'll start with a quick definition of what is artificial intelligence. You can see two definitions of AI at the bottom of this slide here, both of which, the OECD definition and the definition codified in US law, are very general. They apply to a lot of artificial intelligence systems. Anything that is capable of influencing the environment, takes an input, creates an output, makes a prediction or a score. Some of the chatbots that we see more and more these days. But for the purposes of these discussions, we're probably mostly talking about more advanced AI systems than the kinds of things that operate simple. If this happens, turn out the lights. If I walk out of my office, the lights turn off. That's simple AI. We're talking about more sophisticated AI and the policies that implicate it. One of the things that happened really quickly as the administrations prepared to transition was announcements and confirmations of some of the key players for the Trump White House in AI. The first is David Sacks. He is the White House AI and crypto czar, leading the administration's efforts on AI and crypto policy. He has a lot of ties to Silicon Valley. He has a lot of experience in the tech industry. He has a podcast that some folks have listened to, and so he is out there trying to talk about and promote AI as an industry, as well as crypto as an industry, less relevant for today's topic. And he's chairing the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. So he's a pretty major player. Sriram Krishnan is the White House policy advisor on AI. He also comes from the tech industry, Microsoft, Twitter, Facebook. He's really focused on getting industry expertise into policy development. Lynn Parker is going to be the executive director of PCAST. As mentioned, David Sacks will chair that. And she also has an extensive background in AI policy, including at the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Office in the last Trump administration. And that's really one of the places where a lot of the policy moves and narrative has come from. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Michael Kratsios has been nominated to be the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I believe his nomination just yesterday or today advanced to the full Senate. Rich may know more and can make sure that we're up to date. But he was also the chief technology officer of the previous Trump administration. So experience in the Trump administration, was at an AI company. And so he'll be coming in and has been making some statements about where he wants to take policy. And then last, but certainly not least, Vice President J.D. Vance has been the face of the administration on AI policy internationally, in particular, over the last 2 months. He has a brief time in venture capital and has been really focused on fostering innovation and supporting American industry in these conversations, especially internationally, around AI. And so that gives you a bit of a sense of who the players are as we talk about where policy is going. But I don't want to start in 2025. I actually want to start in the Obama administration, where people started to think about what policy looked like for this thing called artificial intelligence. AI had been a topic, and certainly AI has been in use for decades and decades, but it was becoming a policy topic. And so at a high level, there were new discussions and new convenings around AI policy. The first major piece of policy here is a 2019 Trump EO called Maintaining American Leadership in Artificial Intelligence, which launched the American AI Initiative. That underpins a lot of the pieces of federal work that we may talk about today, and particularly around AI education, how the government regulates AI, how NIST approaches standardization, evaluation, and measurement. And so that's really kind of the foundational piece here. So the Trump administration isn't new to AI policy, even though it wasn't something that was the main focus in a way that a lot of this AI policy has been over the past few years. The 2019 EO led to this OMB agency guidance around a deregulatory, market-driven approach to AI policy. And so for regulatory agencies, that was their instruction. But there was also some other pieces, how the federal government was going to use AI was the subject of another EO. How the government approaches critical and emerging technologies like AI. A strategy was put out. The National AI Initiative Act passed, creating that office that Lynn Parker was at. DoD started strengthening their own AI adoption. So a lot of this action was really kind of heating up in 2020, leading into some action in 2021 under the Biden administration. The National AI Research Resource Task Force was launched. NIST started their work on the AI risk management framework and released it to help think about how to manage AI risks. There was a blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights, which was a high-level discussion of civil rights, individual rights, and AI. And then in 2023, the Biden AI EO around safe, secure, and trustworthy AI was issued, directing extensive AI governance actions across the federal government. That brings us to last year. There was some additional OMB guidance. The National AI Research Resource Pilot was launched. A number of congressional actions that Rich will talk about were performed. And a number of regulators were thinking about how to look at AI. That brings us to 2025. We are post-election. We have additional EOs on infrastructure for AI, leading into the inauguration and transition when President Trump issued his own executive orders, rescinding Biden's EO and directing his administration to put together a new action plan, the AI Action Plan, which they are currently taking comments on. I believe those are due on Saturday. So if you're interested in helping them think through where they want to go with the AI Action Plan, that is a date to know. We're also having discussions around export controls for AI resources, discussions around how the AI infrastructure surrounding these tools works, and that's data centers, that's the power grid. That is investing in the research, that is investing in other pieces. But one of the things that is very clear is that we're still developing what this administration's AI plan is. They're taking these comments, and we will know more soon. But I wanted to highlight some kind of thematic shifts in how the administrations have been approaching AI. The Biden administration really emphasized ethical considerations, safety, societal impact, and regulatory measures for AI development, kind of putting guardrails in place for AI innovation. The Trump administration is really focused on private sector collaboration, increasing American industry leadership, and a deregulatory focus. But both of them really, if you look at some of the keywords and themes that the administrations have both used, we're looking at things like security and trust and leadership and national security. And there's a lot of through lines that I think haven't wavered under any of the administrations that I'm talking about here. So you can keep this in mind as we discuss some of our other topics today. But it remains to be seen exactly what the details look like. But I think that this is moving quickly, and we will know more from the Trump administration soon. So with that introduction to the history over the last few years, and the administration priorities, I'd love to turn it over to Rich Ward to talk about some of what Congress is thinking about.
Thanks, Heather. And your overview is super helpful, and there are a number of themes that you touched on that will seem a little overlapping on the congressional piece. And so I'll try to be brief on areas because the topics are the same. It's just as you described, the shift between President Biden or Obama Biden and now Trump. Some of the themes remain the same. And as we look at key areas for Congress, responsible AI development, that's really focusing on addressing bias in AI systems, ensuring transparency, and protecting individual privacy. We have workforce and economic impact, right? So we have to be thinking about how will AI impact people's jobs, and what new opportunities will they create, and what are the type of education and training programs that we need to be thinking about, from STEM, vocational training, and lifelong learning initiatives, since AI very much seems like it's going to be part of our life for forever. And I know you touched on national security and defense, as AI will have significant implications for national security, including military applications and cybersecurity. So we need to be looking at it in that light. And then I think where a lot, particularly the Senate AI caucus, focused was on innovation and global leadership from last Congress, and in particular, we need to be looking at significant increase in funding for research and development. We saw this with the National Science Foundation. How do we support the private sector and AI startups? So all of this is going to be coming to a head in Congress. In addition to if you want to go to the next slide, in addition to mentioning the AI Senate caucus that we saw, Senator Rounds and Senator Heinrich and Leader Schumer helped lead last year, which their bills were introduced, and we were all sort of waiting to see if anything would kind of come into line at the end of the year, which they did not, and so we expect to see a lot of that. But before I kind of get into that, the House Bipartisan AI Task Force released an incredible report in December, and I just wanted to note some of the big takeaways from that, because that, I think, is a little more emblematic of the roadmap that Congress is going to lay out, and is probably a little more aligned with where the Trump administration is, even though it was bipartisan. And you're seeing here sort of fostering innovation, I think, has jumped in front of targeted, in front of guardrails and safety. So guardrails and safety are still there, but and I think you hear this a lot from David Sachs. This is fostering innovation is the most important. The other theme is we do not want to see a one-size-fits-all approach. So I think you're going to see a much more of an agency-led approach from the administration. And so that also means from Congress, you're going to see a committee-led approach. And so I think this is kind of where we were with cybersecurity 5-6 years ago, where cybersecurity, like AI, it touches everything. Therefore, every committee wants a piece of it. Every agency wants a piece of it, and you're going to see the same thing here. And so what does this mean? It means the flexibility to innovate, but it'll also be something where we have to be thinking about it from industry-specific standards, and how these things are looked at sector by sector. And then we touched a little bit on national security and global competitiveness, another major theme in the report. And we also touched on privacy and civil rights. So these trends are what we expect to see carry out with Congress and working with the administration. Next slide. At the risk of leaving legislation off of this, I just wanted to kind of flag a couple things as we talked about sector by sector. One of the biggest areas, social media, privacy, how do we protect our kids? AI has a tremendous amount of power to alter images. So the Take It Down Act is one major area. We expect significant innovation for AI in the healthcare space. So what does that mean for insurance and how we handle Medicare, and are we able to actually tackle these major chronic diseases, as we saw the president talk about in his joint session? And then obviously we have to be thinking about economic regulations. How do we modernize government? And broadly, as we talked about, comprehensive AI policy from the perspective that we need to make sure we're thinking about innovation security and those ethics that protect U.S. citizens. Next slide. I'm turning it over to Justin here.
All right, thanks, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone, or hello today. I'm Justin Pierce, one of the chairs of IP at the Venable Law Firm. I'll talk for a few moments about the impact of AI and IP policy with some of the changes, although it's very early, in terms of some of the themes you've already heard, but as applied to the law that relates to innovation, intellectual property. So here, there's sort of 3 points in terms of some of the executive orders that we've talked about, and you've heard the background already from our prior discussions. Obviously, hasn't even been 2 months, but in January, this is quite interesting. Obviously, the Trump executive order that related to this area revoked much of the Biden administration's directives that had come out of their October 30th, 2023 executive order that relate in a lot of different ways to AI. What's interesting, and still obviously it's early and remains to be seen how much of that turns into real substantive change, because as we all know, in terms of at least most of our focus on AI, even as a country, has been very recent, and much of the laws and rules around this are still emerging and being established. One thing you definitely see is this push towards making sure we don't do things in a regulatory sense that hold back innovation. Richard's point about David Sachs being focused on fostering innovation is something that we already see in some of the early moves being made in this area. Obviously, there's a point in time, you can see in the second bullet, where the Trump administration wants to get feedback from members of its administration and its experts that it's assembled in terms of really assessing what they want to keep versus what they don't want to keep out of the original Biden executive order that related to AI in particular. Now, focusing in on obviously the aspects of the AI executive order, when we talk about who might be some of the key players in the IP or innovation world, you've heard of a few already in this discussion. One that's key is going to be the director of the Office of Science and Technology, Michael Kratsios. Also, the crypto czar that we've talked about, David Sachs, and the National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz. But really, behind the scenes, the main person that these folks will be consulting with and the administration ultimately will be relying on is the expert, if you will, was just announced publicly. I think there was press on this before, but John Squires, an attorney who's well known in the IP space and tech space, has been named or nominated by Trump in the White House for the USPTO director position. That's notable because he is known for positions that are pro-patent, pro-innovation. He's someone who was an in-house counsel at Goldman Sachs for a while, and also has worked a lot with different groups that are at least connected with things like litigation finance in the IP space. the early thinking, and it's again very early, is that he, like much of the administration, is very pro-patent, pro-innovation, and that many of the things that he might have an impact on in terms of regulations at USPTO will be focused perhaps on what's considered to be pro-patent positions. Let's go to the next slide. So some insights in terms of what that may mean. There have been a lot of things that have come out, whether it's the prior administration or specifically the USPTO, with respect in particular to patents for the most part. And that's where most of this will focus in terms of the intellectual property. But there's been a lot that's come out, and whether that's been through case law or through the USPTO regulations over the past few years, because of how fast things have developed in the background around IP and how it relates to artificial intelligence. A couple of the biggest areas of what that really means when you get into it is that a lot of USPTO guidance focuses in on issues like inventorship. And without getting into the weeds of what the particular statutes mean, when I talk Section 101, what I'm really talking about are what things are eligible to be patented versus not. When you talk about inventorship, how that relates to AI is I shouldn't say age-old debate, but age-old in terms of how recent everyone's attention has been focused on it as to whether a human or whether a machine or an AI or robot could ever be regarded as an inventor. That has some big implications because obviously a lot of inventive entities, whether you're talking about big tech or even smaller players, are certainly expanding and working and experimenting with AI. And there's certainly a live and ongoing debate as to what sort of creativity machines have, and then who gets to stand in the spot of being the owner of that innovation that might be the result of an AI or robot's creation. USPTO has given guidance. It generally gives guidance on these areas that follows the current case law that's being developed. In short, on the issue of inventorship, courts and the USPTO have been pretty consistent on this, that machinery, AI, robots can't be an inventor, still has to be a human. How that all works out, that's still, going to be the subject of a lot of different cases, but it's safe to say one has to show that a human ultimately was involved in the creation of whatever the innovation is in order to get credit for having a patent, in a sense. Another thing that's important, there's been a lot of guidance from the office and from courts that relate to patent eligibility. This is particularly important in the software world, where at least on a global basis, there's still a lot of debate as to whether software or software-related innovation should even be given patent protection. As you could imagine, in our big tech industry in US, it's really important for them to have patent protection around their innovation. So this is something that's always going to get attention. What's interesting about all this is right now it's still pretty early. We don't know one way or another whether the current administration will make any changes in these different areas that I've talked about that are that substantially different from what's been done in the past, let's say 3 administrations. I think you may see some analysis as things move with technology, and it'll be in line, I'm certain, with what Trump's executive order stated goal is, as you see here, where the focus is going to be promoting the development, but avoiding things that might be ideological or engineered social agendas, or again, anything that might seem to be over-regulatory that would get in the way of fostering innovation. So some remains to be seen there. Let's go to the next slide. Some insights in terms of what maybe remains. What's interesting as well, I think much of the directions and guidance from the prior Biden administration's executive order will be sort of pushed away or reevaluated and then sort of come back out in the form of this executive order and in line with sort of the principles of the current administration. There are various things that I think will continue, and we've put some of that here on this slide. In particular, we think that the USPTO will continue putting out guidance on, these are some particular areas that relate to sort of the patent practice, but in light of the new and emerging technologies like AI, oftentimes what's considered prior art, meaning the material or state of knowledge before someone who's, let's say, a person of ordinary skill of an art, let's say an engineer in a particular field would have known at a time, That changes because obviously with AI, as many of us have experienced, you now have this ability that's more enhanced than what the average human would have to go back and study and summarize and pull together all this past knowledge. What's patentable versus what's not. We talked about that a little bit before. I think the USPTO is going to continue to rely on the development of case law in that area. One area that's separate from USPTO, it comes up in a couple themes here, is the fact that our Copyright Office is actually under the Library of Congress, and different from the USPTO. As a result of that, it's not under the executive branch. The Copyright Office, for those who aren't familiar with what they've been doing in this space, have done a lot of pretty sophisticated studies and pulled together a lot of experts over the past couple of years, and have put out quite a bit of good research and summaries on sort of their thoughts on the impact of AI on content, and specifically in terms of what might be copyrightable, what might not be, and how to look at applying some of our old laws to this new technology. And a lot of it's very useful, and not necessarily pushing in many cases for one policy or another, but very educational. You see earlier we had some discussion about some of the legislation around social media and privacy, and things like having AI generated deepfakes that are non-consensual taken down. That's something that's even made its way into the Copyright Office reports. There's certainly, I think, probably a feeling across the nation at different levels, not just at the federal, but even states, to do something about the fact that our current laws just don't quite match up with this world where you have really powerful AI, where you can embed deepfakes in all sorts of ways that can show everything that a person wouldn't want to be known for and make it really tough for you to figure out whether it's real or not. That type of content is something that clearly can pose a threat in different ways to people. And I suspect, regardless of the administration that has to deal with that, you're going to see probably similar concern to have more rules and regulation around that type of technology development. Last but not least, right before the change of the administrations in January of this year, the USPTO put out something it called its AI strategy. It's announced on January 14th. Obviously, that is something that, interestingly, will probably be delayed or suspended. I assume that's caught up in sort of this review of what to keep and what not. But interestingly, much of that was internally focused in terms of using AI technology to enhance and improve operations within, as you might imagine, the USPTO itself. So that's something that I think is going to happen, again, regardless of sort of which administration is there at a particular time. As always happens, as new technologies arise, we'll use them as a new tool to perhaps do jobs more efficiently within a government agency. So with that, since we're in about the halfway point of our CLE session, I'm going to give you the CLE passcode for today, and we'll mention it again towards the end of the presentation. But the CLE passcode for those of you who need CLEs is AI Policy 2025. Again, it's AI Policy 2025. Now with that, I'll move to our next segment.
Thanks, Justin. I'm back on here, and we couldn't talk about AI without talking about energy. And I wanted to put up a number of kind of fun stats up here to really drive home that energy demand is rapidly increasing. It is driven by expanding data center power needs and higher computational needs. Goldman is forecasting a 160% rise in U.S. data center power demand by 2030, putting further pressure on the grid. When we look at major AI data center hubs throughout the country, Virginia, Texas, Pacific Northwest, they are experiencing power supply constraints, delays in new projects. Like much of the energy infrastructure debate, permitting delays are an issue, infrastructure limitations, and supply chain issues. We are seeing a lot of announcements, somewhere in the realm of 1.8 trillion in projected investments to expand capacity to meet the energy demand. Energy demand has been relatively flat for the last several decades, and so this has totally been turned on its face. Even today, we saw the announcement from Amazon, Google, and Meta pledging to, along with the World Nuclear Association, to triple global nuclear capacity by 2050. So everyone's talking about this. That pledge alone included 31 countries, 140 nuclear firms, and 14 major banks. So everyone's getting in on this because without the power, we will not be able to build out the much needed AI infrastructure, and that'll also underpin U.S. leadership in this space, as well as the economic benefits. And so federal and state policies are evolving to address the economic, environmental, and security concerns around this AI growth, and AI and the energy growth associated with it. Next slide. I also wanted to touch on the pro uses of AI, as we expect to see an increase in energy efficiency and operation of the grid, given that these AI technologies can help industries reduce waste and emissions, AI-driven smart building systems to optimize heating, cooling, lighting, lowering energy costs. Electric companies use AI power demand response programs to manage peak loads and avoid blackouts. AI improves renewable energy forecasting, increasing reliability and reducing fossil fuel dependence. And this is only going to continue to grow. But I would also argue that despite these efficiencies, growing energy demand for AI is only going to continue to grow. I think exponentially, because it's going to be used for more and more, and the computational power is going to required is going to go up. So while the efficiencies will help and maybe steady energy demand, you're still going to see an upward trend, just because it's going to be part of every phase of our lives. Next slide. Just focusing a little bit on, obviously, President Trump and Congress are recognizing that we need to be looking at energy issues to support AI. You had the president's energy emergency declaration. This is a shift from where President Biden was. President Biden recognized the energy need, but didn't really want to touch fossil fuels and natural gas. And natural gas is going to be a significant player here, particularly in the 3 to 5 year window, as we look at traditional nuclear energy and small modular or advanced nuclear. They're going to take more time, and there's more and larger issues to deal with. And so President Trump is taking all of the above. And so much of his executive order focuses on prioritizing natural gas. We saw the Stargate announcement in his first week, the $500 billion infrastructure plan to boost power supply for data centers. Executive actions are going to focus on expediting power plant approvals. You're also going to see a lot of focus by Congress on permitting reform and deregulation to speed up energy siting projects. And so, this is really a whole of government effort here as we see the major challenges around permitting. I mean, you're not going to be able to build these data centers or some of these energy infrastructure projects, for 3 to 7 years. And so how can we can cut this down in a safe and an environmentally friendly way is really where the big discussions are. And if we look at the next slide, Heather, we have, I wanted to just talk a little bit about FERC, because all of a sudden there's a big shift to FERC and how the energy grid is regulated at the state level, given all the pressures that the grid is facing with respect to AI. FERC has ordered PJM to refine co-location regulations and addressing transmission challenges. FERC recently rejected an interconnection request for nuclear-powered AI data center due to grid concerns. Texas PUC and ERCOT are expanding infrastructure to support AI needs. So you can really see this significant shift where everyone now has to go to where energy is regulated to see how we can work through these issues in order to get the energy needed for AI. And I would also note that just in Congress, Rep. Fedorchak of North Dakota just put out an RFI on energy and AI. I think that the filed comments are due in May. And she's a former PUC commissioner in North Dakota. So there's a tremendous amount going on in the space, and felt just really important to touch on the energy issues. And with that, we'll talk a little bit about the state, but I'll hand that over.
Hey, thanks, Rich. And to bring us in, last but not least, wanted to come back to where the environment looks like now across state legislation. So, particularly looking back at the topics that Heather and Justin and Richard discussed about movements on the federal side, how has this impacted thinking in states? And generally, in the absence of large, comprehensive federal legislation on AI, we've seen many states stepping in with their own legislation, some of which extends beyond the boundaries of what would be considered traditionally states' authorities, and could have significant impact on users, on companies that develop AI products, or even companies that are deploying AI products nationally and also internationally. And so generally, when we look at where states have chosen to focus across this broad array of policy issues, there are generally four big buckets. And the first one is on transparency and accountability. So these are regulations or policies through state agencies that ensure that AI systems operate transparently, and that entities that are deploying AI systems in their states are generally accountable for the outcome for residents. The second area is around bias and discrimination. So many states are looking at how to mitigate potential biases that may come through training of AI algorithms, specifically to prevent discriminatory outcomes towards protected classes, specifically around sectors like employment, or looking at issues around criminal justice. Third is around data privacy and data protection. So here we're looking at safeguarding personal data used by AI systems, much in line with existing privacy regulations or data protection and cybersecurity regulations, extending those to AI systems. And finally, as mentioned before from Justin's side, looking at how to deal with issues around either deepfakes or even potential misinformation. So how you're combating the creation and dissemination of AI-generated deceptive content, particularly in either the personal information or around political contexts. Next slide, please. So while there have been several, over hundreds of different individual state bills that have been put forward across 2023, 2024, and now it seems like almost on a daily basis here in the first part of 2025, I wanted to talk about 8 specific legislative efforts that we've seen that passed or didn't pass in 2024. That kind of means as we look forward to our crystal ball in 2025. So first, in March of last year, we saw Tennessee pass the Elvis Act. And this related directly with what Justin had mentioned about copyright and trying to extend protections around traditional media, around music, name, image, likeness, for artists who produce rights, and for others that may be trying to replicate that art using generative AI. The second piece that we saw introduced in April came from Connecticut. And this is where Senator Maroney in Connecticut, who's taken a larger national lead on AI, sought to establish a comprehensive AI regulatory framework that addressed issues like algorithmic discrimination and deepfake content. That did not end up passing in Connecticut, but as we'll talk in the next slide, the discussion still goes on in Connecticut. In May, we saw Colorado put forward the first comprehensive AI legislative structure that was adopted, which seeks to impose obligations on both the developers and deployers of so-called high-risk systems. And this language mirrors some of what the language around obligations for risk assessment, risk analysis that, for example, we saw passed in the EU AI Act and also proposed in California. In Illinois, there was HB 3773, which comes back to an issue mentioned earlier by Heather, talking about looking at discrimination around protected characteristics and notification of if AI is used in employment-related decisions. So whether or not AI is being used to judge candidates for employment, or those that are currently employed by their worker. In September, we saw California rule two ways in sort of a push and a pull, where Governor Newsom signed two bills that were aimed at protecting performers from unauthorized use and likeness of AI-generated digital replicas. Essentially, this was giving performers the right to renegotiate contracts that did not extend to protect AI rights, and this will go into effect in 2026. But we saw the governor veto SB 1047, which was an effort to seek to establish risk-based guardrails around the development of so-called frontier models. So the larger and future work being done by companies to develop those foundational models that are then used across a range of different other products. Texas, we saw put forward rather a comprehensive roadmap for tackling AI regulation. Once again, sort of mimicking the efforts that we've seen in Connecticut and Colorado to establish a larger AI framework based around risk. And finally, in New York, we saw them pass AI transparency laws that require the state government to inform citizens or residents whenever AI is used to evaluate something the state is examining, or to also talk about their public use of AI. Next slide, please. So where does this all lead? Like I said, at the state level, we've seen a lot of push and pull, even in states that traditionally lean to a more conservative or more liberal viewpoints. Within those states, we've seen the debate push and pull between a lot of different forces. And as AI touches a lot of different things, naturally, this has been a complex area to track 2025 going forward. But I wanted to talk about 4 specific cases that we've seen that sort of discuss this push and pull and may give us an idea for where we're looking at in the future. First, as I noted, in California. So while we saw the governor veto last year, SB 1047, introduced by Senator Wiener, which imposed safety measures around AI models and required mandatory testing, Senator Wiener has reintroduced this bill, but with a different focus. So it still talks around the same risk language, but it's focused on whistleblower protection and expanding public computing on AI research. So not as focused necessarily on the requirements, but still trying to establish some of that language among an area that already has existing law around whistleblower protection. The second is in Connecticut, where I mentioned Senator James Moroney, which has been who's been one of the more public voices advocating for comprehensive regulation. Last year, the governor, Ned Lamont, expressed serious reservations around this effort. And in fact, the legislation, even though passed in the House, it was let to expire in the Senate. We've seen this legislation reintroduced, and there's still ongoing discussions in Connecticut about what the approach the state is going to take. This is similar, I would also mention, not up here, but in Colorado, where we did see comprehensive legislation passed, but the governor and the attorney general have signaled pausing potentially on implementation of that until it can be reworked. Connecticut's going through that same discussion right now. Virginia, where they have adopted 2094, which seeks to regulate the development and deployment of high-risk systems around algorithmic discrimination. So the bill is still awaiting for Governor Youngkin's signature, but it's sparked debate in Virginia as to whether or not the governor should sign this. And there have been a lot of vocal opponents to the legislation. So we're still waiting to see where Governor Youngkin's going to come down. And finally, in Texas, where we've seen a lot of efforts around deregulation or government efficiency in other areas, you've actually had State Senator Capriglione or State Assemblyman Capriglione advance the Texas Responsibility for AI Governance Act. It was introduced the end of last year, but would seek to establish a regulatory framework for the development and deployment of these systems. This has also raised, just like in Virginia, a strong debate within the state about what approach that they're looking forward to taking. So as with all these areas, we are keeping a very close eye, not just on the different discussions happening in the states, but which state may move forward in front of the others, and how this might establish a precedent, not just for the other states, but also potentially what the federal government administration policy will set, and then as well as the international arena and how this may impact companies that are looking to provide products not just across the US, but internationally as well too. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Heather.
Thank you, Davis. Thank you all. We are going to spend a little bit of time answering questions now. We have a few in the queue, but please feel free to put more questions in. I will answer one that has been asked several times. We do plan to post the recording and slides on the Venable website about a week from now. Justin just shared the CLE submission form. I'll repeat that the code word for that form, if you need to collect CLE credits, is AI Policy 2025. All right, and let's get to some more questions. So the first question, AI is supposed to make workers more efficient. Wouldn't this be a perfect rationale for the reduction in number of federal employees? But Musk never mentions AI. I actually think that Musk has been talking about and connecting those two things, and talking about some of the tools that the government doesn't necessarily have in-house, and connecting it with increased efficiency and potential for AI to help make the government work better and potentially need fewer employees. I will observe from outside of that conversation that many companies are looking at AI and realizing that maybe some of the marketing claims about how efficient it was going to make employees may take some time to realize as the technology gets better and better. But I do think that folks who are involved in government staffing and thinking about agencies and what form they will take under this administration have been talking about AI and other tools that will make workers more efficient, that might make some of these processes work better. So I don't know. I think others may have thoughts as well on that question, if anyone wants to pipe up.
I'll speak up just on one aspect of that. I touched on it very briefly in my discussion as it related to the USPTO. I certainly think that use of AI to enhance operations internally in different agencies is something that definitely has been contemplated very recently, for instance, in the USPTO. There's always a balance between how much do you use the technology and truly rely on it. Is it something that could be done as a method of reference or to impact things that might necessarily be not necessarily customer facing as well? As many of us hear oftentimes in the press, and it'll come up in my answer to some of the other questions, there's still a question of accuracy at times or hallucinations when you're talking about generative AI use. So in some ways where you are in a position for the government or any other field where you really are trying to strive for 100% accuracy, you do have to be careful about how much is put into the hands or how much you put a generative AI tool in the hands of people who are administrating, whether you get a certain right or not. So that's food for thought. Obviously, a lot of smart minds will be working on that, probably in every agency in some ways.
Well, Heather, I would also add, we've seen some discussions around AI can certainly make it easier for regulatory agencies to take incoming applications for, permitting or, Nuclear Regulatory Commission or for, some of these very complex where maybe in the past it would take applications 2 weeks, so that can be done in a day. It also on the internal side for government processing and reviewing those, certainly AI tools that probably still need to be developed, and just generally government systems need to be modernized. We've seen Musk talk about that and how none of these systems talk to each other, and all that's very inefficient, and obviously that has cybersecurity implications as well. And so some of this stuff may take time, but certainly there should be efficiency gains over time with respect to many of these tools.
That makes sense. And I think that part of that conversation that also maybe hasn't been connected directly to some of the workforce pieces, but is making sure that the government has access to these tools inside so that they can utilize them for those processes. Another question, I think, Justin, this is squarely in your court.
Right.
Are you anticipating the copyright process to be impacted by layoffs in the Trump administration's present and anticipate any anticipated philosophies on IP?
Yeah, it's a good question. In terms of what we're anticipating now, like I said, the Copyright Office is under the Library of Congress and separate from USPTO. There haven't been any major, I'd say, news stories or information that I'm currently aware of that you see at the, that's been sort of going back and forth at the USPTO level. And I think for two reasons. It's a much smaller staff that is responsible for copyrights and administrating even things like taking in copyright deposits of when a book or music or artwork might even have a copy submitted to the Library of Congress to actually be placed in storage so that there's proof of what was created. The Copyright Office, just as a quick background without getting totally down into the weeds, actually has done a lot of modernization over the past couple of years. There was some talked about and much needed streamlining of the online copyright process that seems to have successfully gone through last year, as recently as 6-7 months ago. So it's one area where already using available technologies, they've streamlined the system. They've cut down the time of what's called copyright pendency, meaning the time that from when you would file something and submit it to the time that you get it registered. I think there's certainly, in terms of philosophies, whether it was the last administration or this one, when particularly it comes to rights around content, books, entertainment, movies, there's certainly, whether it's the administration or as many of you can imagine, huge interest in terms of lobbying, everyone's pointed towards making that move as efficiently as possible. So I don't see that slowing down at all. That's one area where there just hasn't been a lot of news. It's early in terms of how layoffs, if any, in that particular agency would impact anything. Suffice to say, if for some reason there were layoffs, you'd have to really figure out sort of where those are coming from. The two areas that could be impacted, certainly theoretically, would be how long does it take to get copyright processed, or how much does that impact some of the back office or behind the scenes operations of the Copyright Office as well.
Thank you. All right, the next question is an excellent one. For those clients who want to use AI in their businesses, how are we advising them to mitigate their own risk while the laws are still being formed? I think that's a really good question. And I know that I work with clients on exactly those kinds of questions, and I know that my colleagues here do as well. And one of the things that I share is that there are many guidelines and best practices among industries or in general that folks can look to, and being cautious and thoughtful about how you implement AI systems will serve you well regardless of where the law lands, almost certainly. And so thinking through some of those industry standards or multi-stakeholder standards can be very, very helpful. But really it does take a little bit more thought. I will say that I've observed many organizations kind of using this time to think about how they want to approach it and how their mission should impact AI and AI governance and use and deployment within their organization, even as they know that these kinds of laws and guidelines are not going to come from the federal government in the near term. Any other thoughts?
I would just add to that on the cybersecurity side, a lot of the same considerations around access to the data, use of the data, and protection of the data apply in AI systems. But as you're thinking about opening up these tools to your staff, you certainly want to think about the third-party vendors that are hosting these tools or these models. What are the rights to that data? Will they be retraining on it, for example? Staff that have access to these systems that have been trained on sensitive data, are they allowed to see it? So all of those same data protection, data-centric risk framework and ideas, like we look at the NIST framework, should be applied to AI systems. However, part of the challenge is I think that, we still haven't mapped and married up issues around building trust in AI systems, security, as Heather mentioned, data privacy rights and regulations you have to be followed with AI systems. So that's definitely still an area that does require some bespoke work today, and an area that I know that the government and NIST are actively looking at now.
Cool, thanks. We have 2 more questions, so we'll take them as quick hits, and then I'll give you a little bit of information about our next transition outlook webinar. The first question is whether AI tools might need something like Section 230, which shields social platforms and content platforms from liability for user-generated content. The second question is around transparency for AI and whether there's potentially different standards for sophisticated or advanced AI systems than there might be for kind of more run-of-the-mill AI systems. And I think that both of those are interesting. They're different. I will say that Section 230, the original sponsors of Section 230 have disavowed its use for AI, for generative AI tools. They think that that is something different. And so I do think that this may be a situation where we are not in the same position in terms of, and Rich, I'm looking at you a little bit because I think this is a congressional question, where Congress would feel excited about broad liability exceptions that might be perceived as letting folks off the hook. On the other hand, there's a huge amount of excitement about AI.
Yeah, I would add that 230 is definitely a lightning rod for Congress and anything with respect to the political sphere. That said, there probably does need to be some level of guardrails. So it may have to take a different path because Section 230 has a lot of baggage, but it's probably still the right question.
Liability protections for AI tools and where liability falls feels like the right question. And I suspect we'll approach it differently than we did for Section 230 as a society, but
In the 90s.
in the 90s, exactly.
Right. I mean, that's
very
also, that many think it's way too broad now, and you couldn't envision what happened, where we've gone from then till now. And obviously there's a lot of implications, but there, how would you protect yourself as a company if you're, having users all the time enter in stuff and it's just spitting out, especially from generative AI perspective. So yes, I just don't know how.
Fair.
Politically.
All right. I will say we are running out of time for all of the questions. So thank you for being an engaged audience. I do think that transparency and disclosures will be a topic of discussion about like when you need to disclose and what might be appropriate. So, but with that, I will close this out and do a quick plug for the next Transition Outlook webinar on Brave New World for government contractors. So thank you all for joining.
One last thing I'll mention, just so everybody has it, is the passcode AI Policy 2025. Use that for CLE credit.
Well, and Heather, we have another webinar on the 26th on trade and tariffs.
Oh,
That
feels timely.
might be on some folks' minds too. That is actually the second one we've done because first one we did was in December.
So tune in. We'll keep explaining what we're seeing. So thank you all.